Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on tips and tricks to organize your files with Intellivue GX. And today's topic, we will be covering, I'm going to show how to review the basic indexing steps within Intellivue GX. I will also show some advanced indexing steps. I'm also going to review some of the different quality assurance features to review the different how to review the documents and manipulate them within Intellivue GX. I am also going to review and show some additional features of the page extents, which this would be how to add bookmarks, notes, and redactions before you file those documents into the system. And then I'm also going to show the different user options that you can utilize to make your indexing much easier as you file those documents. So let's jump straight into our demo. I'm going to pop over here to GX now. And so first thing, as we review the basic indexing steps, I am going to be on my indexing tab. And the first thing you want to do is to go to your list button here to locate your indexing list that you have your scanned documents in. When I select that, it is going to pull up an index document list window. Within here, depending on your user permissions, you will have a list of maybe one or several indexing lists that you have access to. And depending on how they're shown, I have access to 2 separate applications. So I can choose to index files in accounts payable or human resources within this demo. We are going to focus on human resources, and I'm going to select my indexing list, and I can see that I have some little statistics of how many documents, like the number of pages total, and then the smallest batch of pages and the largest batch of pages. When opening up the indexing list, you have 2 options. You can select it and click this checkout button, or you can double click on the indexing list. I like to double click, I think it's quicker. Double click, then it will open up my indexing list. Over here on the left side, just to kind of review some of the components of the indexing window, all of your scanned documents or batches will be listed up here, and you'll see when I select this first row, it has a document ID, which is the batch ID number, the date and time that it was added to the indexing list, the number of pages, and then if you have any field data, it would say some information here. But when I select that, it'll then list my 2 pages over here on the left side in the pages column. And as I'm reviewing the pages, I can click on each one. And then over on the right side in my image viewer, this is where then I can see those 2 individual pages. And I also have some options to navigate back and forth to review those pages. For the filing process, depending on how your application is configured, you'll see your application listed here. If your application has multiple subfolders, your first step would be to select the subfolder that you want to place the documents into. And then you have the option where you can select this top green arrow that has lines underneath it. And if you hover over the buttons, it'll tell you what they mean. But this top button, it's going to then place all of my documents within my subfolder that I want to file them in. So if I click that, it will then place those 2 under my subfolder. Once I have them in my subfolder, the next step will be to apply your document attributes or those document labels in this attributes section. So within these, whichever items are relevant, we put the year, and then if we have a particular document type, let's say, so I don't see anything that matches my new employee data record here on the right. I can give this document a status, and then I have an option if I want it. I can check it, and it'll give today's date, or if I have my calendar widget option turned on, which I'll show how to turn on this feature later in the training. But then I can choose the date that needs to go here. Once you have all of your document labels entered, click on this green apply button to adhere them to the document. And when you do that, you'll see a green applied label over here in the attribute section. And then your subfolder that you have selected will be highlighted green. The next step is then to create the folder that this document needs to go into, or search for the folder that it should go to. If you know this record already exists, you can use any of the fields and put in some search criteria. So let's say my last name, and then I'm going to run my search. And it found one folder, and I know this because it's pulled back the information and auto-populated it into these index fields. If I want to just confirm what it pulled back, you can always click over here on the search tab, and then you'll see that search record that it has found. So now I'll go back to my index, and if this is the proper folder, then all I need to do is hit my commit append, and now that document has been indexed. Now, sometimes if you are a first-time user of the indexing, you may have a couple pop-up windows that will appear. I will show you, and I have those all disabled at the moment, but I will show you later on in this training how to, some of the user options that you can use to hide some of those options if you would prefer not to see some of those windows. Okay, so let's go through one more basic indexing just to kind of show that flow one more time. And this time, I'm going to click this clear to clear out my fields, and then we'll go through as if we're creating a new folder. So you select your batch, then select the subfolder that that document or documents need to go into. Click your top green arrow with the lines underneath it to move the pages into the subfolder. Enter in your document labels. Click your apply button to adhere that label to those documents. And then since this is a new folder I'm going to create, I'm going to fill out the fields. Anything in the folder indexes section, if it's red, indicates that is a required field. So if you go to hit commit and you don't enter in a required field, it'll give you a prompt asking you to put in that information. So let's put in our details. So since this is a test folder, we'll do and then if we hit commit, it will then remove that document from our indexing list and place it into our new folder that we've created. So that is kind of your basic workflow for indexing. Now let's go over some of the advanced ways that you can index within Intellivue GX. So I'm going to hop down here to this 7-page batch because I want to show a scenario. So if at the copier, you're not separating each different document set into its own batch, but maybe say you're scanning multiple different document types into a single batch. So within the 7-page, if I go through my buttons, so I've got an application, and if I pop to page 3, I've got a different doc type of new employee data record. And if I pop down to page 5, then I have another document type of performance appraisal. So one advanced way of indexing is that instead of having to separate these out, which I'll show this feature here a little bit later in the training, but let's say you wanted to just maintain everything in the single batch and not scan it separately or even manually separate it here within GX, you have the option that if we're going to work with this first document type, holding down my control key, I'm going to select page 2, so I have the 2 highlighted. And then once I have them highlighted, I can simply drag just those 2 documents and hovering over the subfolder while holding down my left mouse button. Then as I'm dragging them, it'll place just those 2 pages into my selected subfolder. And then if we go through this process, then I would continue with my labels. Locate my folder or create the new folder. And then when I hit commit append, it will index just those 2 pages and leave the other 5. And there is an option that you do need to turn on so that way you do not lose these unindexed pages. And I will show you where that option is located here towards the end of the training as we review options. But I like this feature because then it saves having to separately scan different document sets at the copier or the scanner, depending on how you're inputting those files. And also, I think, saves time from having to manually separate. So I'm going to go through and do this one more time. So and if you say you've got multiple documents, if you select the top document and say maybe you need to go down to page 4, if you select the top document, hold down the Shift key on your keyboard, and then click on the number 4, then that'll highlight all of the pages, and then you can easily drag those over. And if you ever need to place the documents back, you can use these orange arrows here, and then the top one's just going to remove all the pages and place them back. But let's say we're going to do 1 and 2. And if you didn't want to drag and drop, if you select that subfolder first and then hold your control key down and select the 2 pages, you can click this bottom arrow and it's only going to add these selected pages if you didn't want to do the drag and drop method. So once I have just those 2 over, I'll come back and apply my labels again. And then since my values are retaining, I'm just going to commit it to the same folder. And now I am down to my 3 pages. So that is one of the advanced ways that you can index if you didn't want to pre-separate or manually separate within the indexing module. Now let's move on and talk about some of the different types of quality review features that you can do within GX. So if, let's say, you don't have GX Capture or some scanning software that you can manipulate and modify the images before they come over to your indexing list, you do have a few options that you can do within the indexing side where you can't rescan, but you have some manipulation that you can do. So I'm going to start with this 10-page batch. And the first feature that I want to show is where you can do a remove blanks option on each individual batch as you select it. So if we focus on this page 10, and if I go down through here, and I see, oh, there's a blank page in my viewer. And then if I go down just a couple more pages, and I see, oh, I have another blank page. So instead of having to manually delete these, because you may easily have a batch of 100 pages or more, and there may be several blank pages in there. But if you want to remove the blanks, once your batch is selected, in this pages column, there's some buttons to the right of it. Down here towards the bottom, the very last button, if I hover over it here, it is called Remove Blank Pages. And if I click this, it's going to pop up a window that allows me to put in a number that will then, when I click Continue, will then go through the batch and then remove anything that has a number that is lower than this. And this number is coming from So if I right-click over here on this blank page, and in my right-click menu, if I go down to Properties, if I look down here at this image file size, it's going to show me how much data that has been captured on this page. So kind of the, black speckles and things that get scanned through. So it's determining that this page has about 736 bytes of data. I can use that as a point of reference when I'm using my gauge scale here. So I'm going to start at 1,000 bytes. And depending on how your documents get scanned in or how you copy them, sometimes this may end up being maybe 3,000. It just depends on how your blank pages get defined in that byte size. But if you make it, and I would say you could always start off in small increments of 1,000 or 500 and just kind of work your way up until you get the set value that will work for you most of the time. And by starting small, then you're not going to lose anything that might have a couple of typed text on it. But for most blank pages, the bytes are pretty small. If you have anything that even has a sentence of words typed on it, it already jumps up in byte size. It's usually doubled. So if you start at 1,000 and hit continue, this value will retain. But that's kind of how to go about locating that byte size. But let's go ahead and hit continue. And it's going to process through, and it's found 3 pages. So it's already deleted those. So I'm going to click OK. And now my 10-page batch, as it resizes itself, has now become 7. So if I jump from this page 2 to the next page, we do not have those blank pages anymore. So that may be a useful feature for those that are using copiers most of the time that go straight to indexing list versus if you don't really have a dedicated scanner and utilizing your GX capture software. One of the other features that we have is, let's say you're going through and you didn't want to index by selecting several pages at a time and just kind of taking that batch down that way, but you actually want to physically separate those pages. What I usually do is within the pages section is I go down here and locate the first page of the new batch. And once I've found that, then down here in my pages button, it's the button right above the remove blanks feature. I will click, it's called separate document. When I select that, it'll then give me a prompt to say, are you sure you want to separate the document on the selected page? And I click yes. And then that document has now been separated. So here is our first document. And it's thinking. And then here's our second document where it is separated. So that's a nice feature to have. But always remember to select the first page of the new batch and then just hit that separate. If you come into a scenario where maybe you need to combine documents, that action is going to occur up here in the batch section. And what you would do, and you can only combine 2 batches at a time. And I usually like to work starting from the bottom going up. But let's say maybe we needed to combine batch 10 with batch 6. So I select the first batch, then holding my control key down on my keyboard. Then I select the second batch. And then I will right-click on either of the batches. And in that right-click menu, you have this combine option. And based on the document ID, this is where I'm going to tell it I want to put batch 6 before batch 10. And then once the batch list refreshes itself, I will then now see my 2 batches combined. Some of the other quality review options that you have is you can use these rotation options up here to rotate pages. And this is going to be over in the image viewer. So if I rotate, you can rotate to the right 90 degrees. You can rotate to the left 90 degrees. You can also flip the document 180. So if you have a document that scans in portrait but supposed to be a landscape, you could rotate it and then click this little Save Rotated button. And then it'll ask if you also need to rotate all the other pages in the batch. If you need to rotate the rest, click Yes. If not, click No, and then it's only going to save the one rotated. And then you can just continue through your batch and rotate the individual documents if you need to rotate those. If you need to delete a page, maybe you're going through and you find an unnecessary page that does not need to be there. Over in the Pages section, if you click on there's a little X icon down here above the Separate button. If you click on that X, it will, when you click it, it'll ask, are you sure? It will bring up a little Delete Pages window, and when this pops up, just click Yes, and that document will then be deleted. So this can be your way if you need to manually go through and remove any additional pages or blank pages that maybe didn't get removed in the Remove Blanks process that is bigger than your threshold that you set here within the Remove Blanks section. You also have the ability in the Batch section to delete pages as well. If I select my batch and right-click on it, within this batch menu, I can delete my selected batch, or I can do delete all, and it'll delete all of the batches that I've checked out. So maybe you just had a really bad set of scanned batches and you need to redo them. But if you select any of these, it'll always prompt you to confirm if you want to delete those. And if not, just click No. If you come into a scenario and maybe say you have a couple pages that are not in the correct order, you have the ability to reorder these pages. And this reordering occurs once you have moved the documents into your subfolder. So let's say maybe page 3 was supposed to be page 2. When I select page 3, then I have some little up and down blue arrows that become enabled. And this is where if I need to move page 3 up one, I just click up, and then it puts it above page 3 or page 2. And then I can do the same if I need to move this one up or down. Then you have that option to move it up. And then when you go to index, those pages will then be in the order that you've designated here. So those are some of the quality review or quality assurance features that you can utilize within the indexing module. Let me now pop over and show you some additional features. So if you're going through your indexing process and as you're reviewing, say you needed to add a bookmark, a note, or even maybe some redactions to a document, you have the ability to do that. And over here in the image viewer in the top, you have a little redaction section for redactions and then an extents. So if on this page I wanted to leave a bookmark or a note, if I click on extents, this will expand and then it gives me a section to leave a bookmark for this specific page. And if I wanted to leave a note as well, I can do that. And then just click my apply. And when I go to commit, then those two values will be adhered to this individual page. And if you have a multi-page batch, you can just go through each of the pages, and then the extents will reflect each individual page that you apply. If you want to do redactions, that process is I click the little redactor icon, and then that will enable me to draw a box over the designated area. And once that box is created, it still has your 0 value in there, and we still need to create that alternate permission. So if I right-click anywhere in the box, it'll pop up my permission access level, And this is that alternate level that you need to adhere. So when you go to publish out of the system, you see that box. And so let's say, for example, I'm utilizing a business rule of 25 for redactions. I'll pop that in there. And then if I'm just doing the selected zone, I can click set selected zone. Or if I have multiple zones that I need to be the same, then you can just select set all zones. But we'll just do the selected for now. Once that is applied, go back up to your redactor icon and click on the icon to kind of close out of redaction mode, and then you get a confirmation window, and then you just click the top one to save redactions, and then it will, and even though you can't see them, they are there, so when you click commit, those redactions will be applied. And if you're in redaction mode and you need to remove sections, the little arrow to the right of that redactor button will allow you to remove the selected zones or all the zones if you need to just erase and start over. But those are how to do bookmarks, notes, and redactions during the indexing process. Okay, now let's give a review of some of the user options within the indexing that you can do. If you have the latest GX, one update that we've made on the UI interface that you could customize the view over in the subfolders and attributes section. If you happen to have many subfolders and multiple attributes, you can change how this is laid out. So instead of it being vertical, you can make these two horizontal. And to do that, if you just click anywhere in this attributes window, attributes box, or click on the attributes word, it'll change visual positions. So if you happen to have subfolders, titles that are super long, and you just want to make it easy to see, you could change it this way. And then to save that from vertical to horizontal, if you go up here to your Tools menu and go down to the bottom, there's an option to save UI changes. Click that, and then the next time you open up your indexing list, the viewer will save this way. If you want to switch it back, once again, just click on the word attributes or anywhere in that box, and it'll flip back, and then just make your changes again under Tools, and then save UI changes. The rest of your user options are going to be located up here in this options box. And in the top section, you can see here I already have a few pre-configured, and these are kind of the default ones that I usually like to have enabled during my indexing process. The first one I wanted to point out is this post-commit retain index values. What this option does is when you go to hit commit append in this section, by default, if you don't have that selected, when you have commit append, it will automatically clear all of your folder index fields out. And this would be a scenario, to not have this checked would be a scenario if each batch was meant to go to a different folder. That's when you keep that unchecked. But if you have multiple batches that belong to the same folder, then I would have this option enabled. And if you come to the point where your next batch is for another folder, then I just simply hit that clear button, and then the fields get cleared out, and then allows me to put in the new information, which will then be retained until I clear it again. The other option selected here, the do not show commit append confirmation window. Now this is an option you can choose to turn off or choose to leave on. I think it depends on if you're wanting to look out for that you're not indexing something into duplicate folders or creating duplicate folders. So if I leave this unchecked and I hit commit append, but I've searched for that folder, or I've put in my fields and I hit commit and it has found a folder with the same details. If this is unchecked, it will show me a prompted window saying, hey, you have a folder that contains the information that you've listed in these folder index fields. And then from that prompted window, you have the option to either commit to that same folder, or click no and realize, oh, maybe you had a number or something off, and then you can modify it so then that record doesn't get indexed into the wrong folder. But if you are fairly confident that your documents are supposed to be appended to the correct folder with the information, and you don't want to see that additional pop-up message, you can check this box and it will not show you that additional confirmation message if you have duplicate folders. So that is a user option depending on how you want to move through your indexing process. One of the options I have selected here, and this is really optional, when I have this checked, it hides an additional field that is listed up here. So if I uncheck it here now, you can see there's an additional field here called permission access level. And this is where if you are utilizing folder level permissions, this would be similar to redactions, but you're redacting at the folder level. This is where you could set folder permissions to be at a 75. So depending on users, if they have the ability to see a whole folder, that's just another level of security. But for the most time, if you don't need to use this in your indexing process, you can have this option checked, and then it will actually hide that field. So then you don't have to worry about accidentally entering information into it. This option here, move pages to document on select non-subfolder application. This is where if you have an application and it doesn't have designated subfolders like over here in this example, I've got administration benefits, general HR. You may have an application that just says folder or document. And in that scenario, because you're not having to select different subfolders go to, you would have to manually select and move the pages over every single time, even though it's just an individual folder. This option here allows you to, instead of having to select every time, it allows you to automatically have the pages moved over into that single folder. So this is a nice option to have in that scenario, so then you don't have to manually select every time. So that may save you some steps. But if you have an application that has multiple subfolders, like in my example here, then this option will not work in that scenario, only for those with a single subfolder. One other option that you may utilize, we have this option to enable date picker for date fields. This option allows you to turn on down here, for example, in this date of termination. It allows you to have this little date picker widget. So down in this scenario, if I want to see this calendar as I'm selecting my dates, this will allow me to manually select it and kind of click through the dates and select it that way. If you would prefer to not have the date picker field and just have it be a text field where you would enter in a scenario of where you're just manually typing in the date, if you have this option unchecked, then it'll remove that date picker or calendar widget, and then you have to manually type in the date fields. So this, if you like the calendar widget, this would be the option that you would want to turn on here. And the last user option that I want to show is this post-commit section. So by default, when you use Intellivue GX indexing for the first time and you hit commit, after you've gone through a couple of prompted windows, the last window you get is a post-commit window, and it's going to give you options to preserve entire document, preserve document with unindexed pages, or delete document from list. And let me turn this option on so you can see what that looks like by default. So if I'm going to do this individual document here, and let's say I don't have any attributes, and we're just going to say we're going to put it in this folder here, and I hit my commit appends. This is the window you get that pops up by default. And this is where it allows you to choose which action that you want. And preserve will retain it, a copy of it in the indexing list if you want to index it into another folder, Preserve document with unindexed pages is not available because I only have one page and I don't have any documents left over here in the pages section. And then delete document from list will then automatically remove it from my indexing list and then permanently place it out into the folder I'm assigning it to. So if you would prefer not to see that pop-up window and you want to designate which option is selected every time you hit the commit append, that is where in the options section, once my computer responds back here, this is where you can then select which one you would prefer. I usually like to stick with the preserve document with unindexed pages because if I accidentally forget to move a page over into my subfolder section, then I'm not going to worry about it getting deleted. But if I have this delete entire document from list and I accidentally forgot to move a page over, it will index what's in the subfolder, but will then delete what has not been placed in the subfolder. So I feel like this preserve document with indexed pages is the best option to choose, but it is up to you what your preference is. But then just click OK, and then all of those options are applied. And then when you go through your indexing, you'll have all those options turned off and kind of default and set on until you choose to change them the next time. But that is kind of a review of the indexing process, some of the different features. Now let's pop on over to our Q&A. And for those if you're not sure how to send in a question, in your webinar, there should be a little question box down here. You can just type in your message and click send, and then I'll see the questions over my window, and I'll kind of call them out here if you all want to start sending in your questions now. Okay, so let me go through. We have a question that is, when separating pages, when you're selecting, so if I were on this 3-page batch here, you always select the first page of the new batch. So if you have 2 batches, you wouldn't select the last page, you would select the first page of the new document. So here, page 3 is going to be the new batch. My internet's a little slow today, it appears. So page 3 here is an I-9, and then if I click back up to page 2, that is the second page of the first document. So to separate, I'm always going to click the below document or the first document of the new batch, and then click my separate scenario. If I were to click on page 2 and click separate, it would put page 2 with page 3 and only split out page 1. So if I select page 3 and then do my separate, and then I get my just confirmation window, then it will split those 2. So then there's the I-9 form in this scenario when it pulls back up here. And then the 2 pages for my other document are right above it. Are there any other questions? And I'll wait a few more minutes if you have any questions to send in. But once this recording is done, we will have this up on YouTube, and we will in our YouTube channel, and we will send a link out to those documents. But everybody will be able to have to go back and review this video after today's webinar. Okay, we have another question that came in. We had a question come in that, what if you accidentally commit a batch to the wrong folder, and you need to, like, what would the scenario be if you accidentally index it to the wrong? In that scenario, if you place it into the wrong folder, you have the ability within GX to copy move items and move them into another folder. And in the Intellivue manual, it would be under copy move section. But you have the option, like if you would prefer to not copy move that section, you could easily delete it and just rescan it depending on what is easier for you. I'm not going to remove the copy move in this section since that's not in relation to indexing, but copy move would be the option. But if you want to specifically review the person that had submitted that question, if you wanted to personally kind of have a quick, like how to go through that scenario, just put a email or call in to our support staff. And here's our email if you need that for reference. And we can walk you through that scenario specifically. Okay, we have another question that came in. If you have a scenario where you're having issues with your copier and separating multiple documents, we may need to directly talk with you regarding that scenario to review more specifically maybe what's going on. So I think we need to you might want to email in or give us a call to support regarding that question, so we can make sure we're giving you the right information and maybe troubleshoot maybe what's going on in that scenario. Any other questions? Okay, we had another question coming in, if you can split multiple documents. In the separating scenario here in GX, you can only do one document at a time. So if I was on the 6-page document and maybe all 6 pages needed to be separated, you would have to go through each individual page to split them apart. We don't have an option right now that would allow you to select a page and maybe do a split, say, hey, split every single page. We don't have that option right now, but that is something that I can push through to development to add to our enhancements list to make that separation process easier. But for now, it is just one individual document at a time. We have another question that came in asking if you selected multiple pages, holding the control key, and then choose those pages. I don't believe that you could split that way. I think you have to select an individual, and it would only be at a one time. You couldn't do your control and split that way. Let's see. For another question came in and was regards to around the annotation features that we have in GX, which are the highlight, where you can highlight, put text boxes on things. We don't have that feature right now available in the indexing side. It's only on the post-indexing side when you go to search within the folder. So you can't do that within indexing at this time. But that is something I can push through. Again, like the other option that was asked, I can push that through to be put onto our enhancement list for indexing. See any more questions? Just going back through the list in case I missed anything. And once again, if I didn't get it, like all of your questions answered, or if you want to just re-review maybe a certain piece of today's webinar, like I said earlier, you can also give a call into our company and ask for support, or you can email us directly and then we'll get back with you. And we can cover like any specific scenario that I wasn't able to answer today, if it's in regards to copier related things, or if it's something in general that we weren't able to cover in today's training. Okay, if there's no more questions, thanks again everybody for joining today's training, and we'll have this video on YouTube sometime later today for review, and then you'll get a post email after this. We may have the link in that, but I'm not for sure at this time. But we will have it out on YouTube, so if you want to check our Intellinetics channel out at some point, we will have the video out there if you want to go back and review the different steps that we've covered. Thank you everybody, and have a great day.